It's definitely better being off social media, and that includes YouTube. So I took a month off and I felt a certain way, and then I've been back online. I don't know whether it's the screen time or the YouTube usage or what, but I feel myself craving another complete social media break, and that would include YouTube, which is tricky, because it's part of my work. But I don't know. There might be a way of figuring that out, or uh, maybe doing it so it's only like once a week or a week. Meek, they shall inherit the earth. Um, but we'll see. Somebody asked me what I thought of that book that you read recently. One of the books that I read on the social media blackout was The Island by Aldous Huxley. Um, I thought it was a bad book. It's badly written, and I'm not the only person who thinks it's a badly written book. Aldous Huxley thinks it's a badly written. Thought it was a badly written book because of the sheer weight of exposition. The Island is his description of a utopian society. Now, when I say it's badly written, I just mean if you're going to hit me with a novel, it better have a plot. It better have a narrative. It better have a story and a character arc and some sort of epiphany in it. And there really isn't one. The people in the novel are mouthpieces for Huxley's ideas and potential counter arguments of people who he has argued with or will argue with in the future. So you have quite irritating plot devices, not plot devices, dialogue devices. I'm a frustrated writer. I tried to write a novel in 2010. I think I've talked about on this channel before. I might go back to it. I don't know. I hired an editor. I hired like an author, sort of published author, to help me write it. And they were like, "Oh, you write well, but this is terrible thriller writing." So when you're writing a novel, there's a skill, and being a good writer, like if you're a psychology teacher, or before that I was a self-defense instructor who focused on psychology, I'd just give people data. And that's a terrible way of doing. If you're writing a thriller, it's a terrible way of writing a thriller. And the thriller author that I hired was like, dude, hold stuff back, that it's for the audience to discover later on. So similarly with Huxley, what I'm saying is this is a poorly constructed book. We don't all have to kiss his ass because he's a great British intellectual and he wrote very well, which he did. Sorry, I keep calling it The Island. It's just called Island. It's a bad book. Having said that, there's really nothing in the book that I would massively disagree with. I think like his description of a utopian society that was heavily self-reliant, that didn't rely much on medication and that kind of thing. You know, it made, on the face of it, it made sense. You know, it was a description of a non-neurotic society. But even at that level, I'm like, I don't think this is a magnum opus. It's like you've looked at politics, you've looked at culture, you've looked at life in Southeast Asia, you've looked at life in Europe for a period of time, you've seen what's wrong, and then you go, a utopia would be the opposite of that. And it goes into descriptions of how people should be raised, how you should spend time with your children, how adolescents should be introduced to sex and sexuality, how psychedelic drugs should be used, how hypnosis and psychology should be used, and all of these kinds of things. But basically, I have to say, it's the kind of thing I might get a bit of a kick in. I thought it was a bad book. I read it because I'd heard Jordan Peterson reference it, and he said something really interesting, or made it sound interesting, which is that in the book, the birds in the trees are trained to say, attention, attention, pay attention. And Huxley describes them as talking in a dry, British nasal voice. So you imagine, like, of that era, they would be going, attention, attention, pay attention. That's what they've been trained to do, so that everybody on the island is constantly reminded to be in the moment and to pay attention. The book even goes into a description of the pros and cons of the Hindu perspective of the world, the Buddhist perspective of the world, and even gives a breakdown and a criticism of the different schools of Buddhism. It's heavy. Oh, the plot device, or sorry, the dialogue device that becomes irritating is you have a white English journalist who's deliberately shipwrecked himself on the island, who's learning about the island. And so somebody will say, they'll sit down to eat. He, the foreigner, I think it's supposed to be an island off Malaysia. So he will sit down as a foreigner with people, and they will do something. So they say they sit down to eat, and then they do a certain ritual before they eat. And then he'll say, why'd you do that? And then that gives them the scope to open up a description of why they do the thing that they do. And it's about appreciation for food, being in the moment, how you should show gratitude for the food. And by the 7th or 8th time that Huxley does that, I was ready to fling the fucking book out the window. I was like, don't, it's so cheap. So this foreigner, the Englishman, is just there going, so why'd you do that then? Oh, great. Now I'm going to get 6 pages of explanation about why they're so wise for doing this particular thing. It was a bit, it to me, a bit corny and a bit, I'm not saying that the guy is like, he's a progressive, he's a liberal, he's open-minded and all the rest of it. There is a little bit, there's a tinge of patronizing colonialism in it, just a tinge, just a soupçon. But the reason why I mentioned Jordan Peterson referencing it was because he referenced it incorrectly. And it's not the first time he's done it. His description of why the birds are saying attention, attention, pay attention, Jordan Peterson's description of the lecture does not match what is described in the novel. And when I read Huxley's novel and I was reading it, I got this weird feeling like, I wonder if Mr. Peterson's read this, or if he's heard somebody else reference it and thought it was a smart thing to reference because it would make him sound like he'd actually trudged through this fucking exercise in exposition and fantasy. And I don't think he has, because there's a character just like Jordan Peterson in the book who is mocked savagely by Huxley and really, really criticized by Huxley. And I'm like, would Mr. Peterson really have referenced it? So it's one of these many cases where I've got this horrible feeling that Mr. Peterson is referencing things that he hasn't actually read. A conversation I've had with Sam Vaknin recently went along similar lines, where he was saying he gets the impression that Jordan is pulling bits of information from different places. Nobody's doubting that he's high IQ. Like, Jordan Peterson's a smart guy, but the way he presents information is fundamentally and shows a consistent pattern of being disingenuous. It's a thing that he does. Anyway, guys, I had one meeting and then I have another meeting to go to, and the meeting that I was about to go to, I'm in Liverpool Science Park right now, I now need to go to the Wirral, was put back, so I had a 20-minute gap. So I just thought I'd come on and do the video that I said I would do. If that was not the book you were referring to, person who asked me, please ask me what book it was. The other couple of books I think I mentioned was Steppenwolf and The Lone Wolf, and then I'm starting to read Warwolf by Herman Lons. Let me see if there's any questions here. I have a question. What to do when you want to leave a borderliner? Is that like a dreamliner? It's a new form of plane, and he threatens suicide. Well, are you asking like what I personally would do, or are you asking what like a clinician would do? You've got to decide for yourself as an individual human being whether that's a sincere threat or not. It's very common for people in the cluster B spectrum to dramatically claim that they will do things that would cause you pain in order to control you. So that to me sounds like an act of emotional terrorism. So me personally, I would moderate very carefully how seriously I took that threat. But I'm certainly not going to say in a public forum, you should ignore when people or have somebody misinterpret what I'm saying. About Richard Grannon said when somebody says that they're suicidal, to ignore them and to assume it's false. No, not at all. You've got to take it seriously. And that's why somebody on the cluster B spectrum would do it, because they know they're relying on your decency. They're playing on your morality. They're leveraging your morality. So I would make an assessment as to how serious that was. And then I would extricate myself from the situation accordingly. I'm speaking now personally. I would never allow myself to be imprisoned by somebody else's threat of killing themselves. That would not cause me to stay. And I've even philosophically, and I've had time to do this, worked it through, and I'd be like, okay, what if you left and that person then did go through with it and kill themselves? I'm talking personally now. I'm not offering you advice. I'm telling you how I feel about it and what I would personally do. This is not advice. I would have to square that away in my own head and just go, well, I didn't kill them. They killed them. That's their choice, not mine. What a horrifying thing to live in the slavery of having the fear of somebody else hurting themselves over you. You can't live like that. In fact, it's not living. That's not living. And it's a very easy thing to do to say, if you leave, I'll kill myself. So yeah, I personally wouldn't stand for it, but you as a sovereign adult must behave in a way that you find moral and legal and is in accordance with the laws of your state. Lauren says, I'm not a fan of Peterson. What is a book you recommend reading now? I really, really liked Steppenwolf, and I really, really enjoyed Lone Wolf. They're very different books, but they cover similar themes, and I think there are some oblique references to Steppenwolf in Lone Wolf. Lone Wolf, the first half of it was written in the late 80s, and the second half of it, way more recently, like in the past 5 years. He's a Hungarian writer. The first book is written from the perspective, I think, of a German researcher into the last wolves of Spain in Extremadura, where there are still wolves. It was really strange, one of life's weird synchronicities. I read the book, and then 2 weeks later, I somehow was introduced to a girl who's actually from the border between Portugal. She's from the mountains between Portugal and Spain as it backs onto Extremadura, and she actually has a dog that was bitten by a wolf. Just one of those weird life coincidences. But if you have a choice between the two, Lone Wolf you can read in the afternoon. It's really, really lightweight. Steppenwolf is a thinker. It takes a long time to adapt. Steppenwolf it's a German word. It means the wolf of the steppes. And the gentleman who's described in the book is in his late 40s and feels himself to be outside of society, and he feels split between being a man and a human being and this wild wolf who just can't fit in to the world. And it's a story of trying to reconcile that split. It's beautifully written. It's surreal at times. It feels very modern, which is so spooky because he's describing the late 20s, and he's even describing, as a middle-aged man going into nightclubs and they're listening to crazy wild music and doing this exciting new dance. And then you can go and look it up on YouTube. The music he's describing is it's they're doing a foxtrot and a two-step, which you can go and look that up. It's like the easiest dance in the world to do. And the music is extremely lightweight, but he'd only listened to classical music his whole life, and it blew his mind, it was really interesting to me because it's nowadays, I remember when dubstep came out, and I remember being a lad who was working for me in 2009, when I gave him a lift home, he played dubstep in the car, and I'd be like, what is this noise you're listening to? And it was mind bending in the same way that it is alleged when the waltz was created and they first played the waltz. I don't know if it's a legend or if it's true. People would faint because of the music of the waltz. The brain, the neurology couldn't tolerate it. So there's a little bit in there about music and the psychology of music, which is interesting. There's even bits and pieces about the psychology of fashion in there. It feels very now. So Steppenwolf, I recommend. It's also a really fascinating exploration of isolation and loneliness. So it's useful from that point of view. So I would recommend them. Steppenwolf, good. Island, that's such crap. But maybe you get it on Kindle for £3 and just skim it. And there's nothing in there in terms of the exposition. There's nothing in his description of utopia. There's nothing that really goes against. I've talked about a lot of that stuff on the Spartan Life Coach Project. Loads of people have talked about it. it's like it's prescriptive, it's curative. Huxley sees society as sick, and he wants to prescribe a cure, so he does it in this novel format. And it probably was a mistake to do it like that. He probably should have just written an essay on it. Got it. He has, you know, like he has something to say, and he's got you, and he's like, and don't forget, but also you need to remember, and it's like, Aldous, just do you have the story, or are you just going to yell at me for however many pages it is? Okay. Manuela asks, is there any realistic chance of improving in BPD using therapy? Yeah, you know, quite possibly. I mean, I would say, so I've been saying probably for a couple of years now, like often BPD is CPTSD misdiagnosed. If you can handle the two elements of CPTSD that are really important to deal with is the emotional flashbacks, which I have a free course on, which you go and join SpartanLifeCoach.com, the mailing list that's on the website there. You get a free course on handling emotional flashbacks. And then we have courses on dealing with your inner critic, which is the superego. So if the emotional flashbacks are dealt with and the superego is dealt with, which is 3 to 4 months of consistent daily work to get that handled, you can deal with CPTSD. If the so-called borderline disappears, then I would say that probably wasn't borderline to begin with. Sam Vaknin along similar lines been saying about NPD, if it's treated as a reaction to trauma, as a trauma reaction, then there's a chance of dealing with it. So if there is a chance of it healing, it should be treated as a PTSD response. And we should be looking at dealing with the inner critic, the inflamed superego, and the emotional flashbacks if there is a chance of it healing. It might not be a personality disorder. I don't want to I don't want to get into it here, but like it really only matters if you're thinking of writing a psychology thesis. But for many good reasons, these things might not really be personality disorders. They might be learned strategies to deal with trauma. And then you're going to get into like elements of choice. I've had an experience recently with somebody who would definitely be BPD, and I saw her in real time make the choice between vulnerability and being a human and telling the truth and being humble, and then or going back to the addiction of, no, I'm perfect, everybody else is wrong, I'm entitled to special treatment. And I saw her go from a horizontal relationship style, meaning it is equal, you and I are equals, to the vertical relational style where it's like, fuck you, I have no equals, you are all my slaves. And I saw the window of, I wasn't involved enough to get any more involved. Like I couldn't change this, sadly. I saw her make a decision, and I was kind of, when I say right there, not quite right there, but nearly right there between horizontal, vulnerable, human, authentic, and vertical, narcissistic, borderline. And I regret to report that the decision that was made was to do that which was easier. It was easier to be to use a borderline or narcissistic defense strategy to deal with reality. I think I just said the N word about 5 times. And so, you know, this is it's tricky. It's such a tricky issue. There was another video I was going to do, and I forgot to do it. I'll say this now, and then I'll wrap it because I'm going to have to go to this meeting. The other day I was driving in a car, and there was low winter sun. I was driving in the Wirral. I was driving from the east side of the Wirral to the west side of the Wirral, which means the sun was, I was driving towards where Wales would be if you could drive straight to Wales. So the sun was right in our eyes for me and everybody else on the road. There's 5 cars. It's Sunday driving. The 5th car up from me decides to turn right, which means the 4 cars behind have to slow down. But because it's Sunday and people are like switched off or hungover or a bit tired or whatever, we're all driving too quickly, and we're all driving too close together, when that person at the front says, right, I'm now going to turn right, we drive on the left in the UK, of course, everybody else behind has to slow down, and we all had to slam the brakes on. And my initial thought was, that only happened because these 4 fucking idiots in front of me are driving too fast and too close together. And then I continued to drive. And then I was like, this annoying voice in my head goes, but you put your brakes on. And I went, yeah, so. Well, if you also put your brakes on, then you also were driving too fast and too close to the person in front of you. And I had this very conscious moment of going, no, I didn't. No. And I'm like, another part of me is going, no, hang on. Don't think subjectively, think systemically. There's like 4 pieces of machinery moving through a tunnel, through a tube at a certain pace and at a certain rate. And if you leave enough space and you're driving slow enough, you'll see that the person in front of you slowed down, and you won't even need to touch the brakes. You can just take your foot off the gas and you'll slow, and then they'll take off again, and there's no brakes. There's nobody needs to go to stop. And I was like, no, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. I didn't make a mistake. I fucking know I didn't make a mistake. I know I wasn't driving too fast or too close. And then I looped back around again. I was going, okay, let me try it like this. There's no way you wouldn't have had to put your brakes on unless you were doing exactly the same thing that they were all doing. Like, you're just as guilty as them. And then, so like, I'm driving along. Obviously, it's not a particularly serious issue. And I'm like, oh, that's weird and a bit funny. And I was like, okay, so somatically and emotionally, what am I experiencing right now? And there was this hard shell inside of me that was just going, no, I did not make a mistake. I know I've driven professionally. I used to run a taxi company in my 20s. I was a taxi driver and I was a chauffeur. I'm an advanced driver. I definitely, the mistake was not mine. And I'm going, but you put your brakes on, so it was you. And the resistance was physical. It was a physical feeling. It was a knot of like dark energy. Check out my stormtrooper. That one's happy. Yeah. It was not a dark energy right in my chest, and I couldn't crack it. And it felt like a life or death issue. And I was just going, well, why can't you just admit that you're driving too fast? And it wouldn't. Like, there's still a part of me right now, as I'm telling you this story, that's going, it wasn't my fault. But there's another part of me that can tell you, like, objectively, if they would, like, it's nobody's fault. Like, it just happens. It's just a driving thing. But if they are guilty of something, driving too fast and too close together, so am I. Like, I have to be, systemically, I have to be. The interesting part of this was, what was the knot? What was the, so knot in English, if you're not a native English speaker, is K-N-O-T, which is like a rope that's tied very tight, and then you can't untangle it. But it's also N-O-T. Sorry that English is such an annoying language, but it's an interesting linguistic ambiguity. That is a no. So the knot is a knot. It's a no. I didn't make a mistake. I fucking know I didn't make a mistake. It's like, yeah, you did. You must have done. It's like, you have to have made a mistake. There's no way you didn't. Why fight it? And it felt like life or death. It was a physical feeling. It was a physical feeling in that moment where I was like, I cannot not let go of this knot of dark energy. I cannot do it. And I couldn't, it took me like hours to get past it. That is a moment, I think, of a micro experience of, imagine if that was everything all the time, 24/7, and you just couldn't let go of it. And in that moment where I was like, be philosophical, I want you to let go of this. I actually couldn't. In that moment, I couldn't let go of it. I was like, I know I didn't make a mistake. I know it's their fault, which is, you know, if you like the simple models of the N word, that's the simple model of the M word. I am always perfect. Everybody else is always wrong. If anything goes wrong, it's the fault of others. It's never mine. Because if it's my fault, then I need to have the humility and vulnerability to admit that it was my fault. And in that moment, I couldn't do it. Just could not do it. I was like, no. And it felt physical. It was a physical feeling, and it felt very, very important. It felt very, very important right then at that moment for them to be wrong and me to be right, because it matches an image that I have, which, you know, a lot of people who are drivers have that. it's only a couple of days before I ironically enough was listening to a random Eckhart Tolle thing on YouTube, and he was like, has everybody who accuses everybody else on the road of being an idiot not figured out that everybody else can't be an idiot all the time? And then 2 days later I had that experience, and I was like, oh yeah, damn. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. But it's physical. It's in the biology, or it feels like it's in the biology. So when we're talking about recovery, you couldn't get me in that moment to admit it. You couldn't get me in that moment. One example or another metaphor that I've heard of is like the coping strategy of the cluster B, didn't say N word, is the life raft, and I'm drowning. I'm at sea, and the sea is cold and it's dangerous, and I'm drowning, and all I have is this. And I've been clung to this for a long time and isolated on my own, clinging to this. And then some dumb therapist or a coach comes along and says, let go of that thing that's been keeping you alive. Just let go of it. And you're going, I'm not letting go of shit. I'm not letting go of this. There is nothing else. There's just this. There's just me and this coping strategy. And you are just one of many fantasies and delusions that appears to me as I'm slowly dehydrating on my raft. You're not real. You will leave like all the other fantasies and delusions as I'm slowly dehydrating on my little makeshift raft will disappear, which is, I think, why I'm a little pessimistic in my prognosis when it is the hard shell, real personality disorder. Like, that's the shell, penetrating the shell. If it's a CPTSD response, like you get, Sam said it in the Divorcing the N seminar, which is available to watch. I recommend you watch it. It's available on the YouTube channel to watch for free. You know, people get infected by the cluster B. Abused people become abusive. That's not a PD. Like, that'll clear up. If you do nothing, most people, I think, inside of it, if you did nothing just by interacting with other human beings over time, eventually you'll come out of that. Probably over the course of like 3 years or something, you'll come out of it. But if you actually do something about it directly, you can clear it up. It's an emotional flashback. So what you're doing, you go, okay, you're now behaving in a way that is very borderline. You're now doing a classically cluster B defense mechanism. For me now, I would be saying, you should be specifying that is a strategy for let's use the lingo. The lingo is, it's a maladaptive coping mechanism, which means I'm only doing it to try and cope with stress in a way that is non-conscious and trauma-based, and it hurts you and it hurts me as well. Maladaptive. So you treat it as a strategy rather than as being an essence of who the person is. And you also treat it as an emotional flashback. It's an emotional flashback, which means it's temporal. Because an emotional flashback is like a storm. It's a storm that rises up. And the emotional flashback won't always be that way. It won't always be a manifestation of the fall and fight response. Sometimes it'll be freezing. Sometimes it'll be flight. You'll get somebody and they'll go, oh, they're cluster B and they're this and they're that. And you go, okay, but some of their emotional flashbacks are just sadness and they don't drink anybody's milkshake. So then you've got to say, okay, what is this then? Like, we're trying to describe a really complicated phenomena in words, and words like symbols that point. They don't even point to the moon. Like, it's not a finger pointing to the moon. It's a finger pointing to a mirror. And in that mirror, you can read instructions backwards for where the moon used to be. Like, it's really clunky. It's super, super clunky. So you end up, I think, with a twisted model of what's going on. So the way that I like to do it now is to look at the behavior as a series of maladaptive coping strategies. And then people will say to me, well, are they on the cluster B spectrum? Are they histrionic? Are they borderline? Or are they a psychopath? And I would always, if I don't say it out loud in my head, I'll go, you mean behaviors? Strategies. You're actually talking about descriptions of strategies, not of key elements of the human being. So a psychopathic strategy might be like, I'm going to pull a fucking gun out and shove it in your nose and go, you fucking do this now. Or a borderline histrionic hypersexual strategy of being like, oh, I'm going to seduce you and I'm going to hypersexualize everything I do. And so in one scenario, I'm going to fill you with terror and hyperadrenalize you so you do what I want you to do. In another scenario, I'm going to turn you on so you be hypersexualized, and this really, I'm going to everything is discombobulation, like with the cluster B. It's all discombobulation. It's all, how do I get a response? That's why the cluster B is dramatic. That's how it's described in the DSM. It's reaction seeking. It's reaction seeking strategies. It's reaction seeking behavior. I want blind submission through terror. I want adulation. I want lust. I want sympathy. Sympathy. They're beautiful. Like, I mean, that's one thing that isn't a word that isn't associated enough with the borderline, is the desire for pity, this lust, this thirst for pity. It's not enough to get narcissistic supply. I need you to pity me. I need you to feel like I'm the biggest victim who's ever been. I'm beyond Christ and the sufferings of all the martyrs combined. There's nothing compared to what I went through with my mother, what I went through with my father. You know, it's like, wow, you know. I could barely hear you from all the way up there on that cross. You know, it's like, it's heavy, man. It's dramatic, and it's infused with ego, huge amounts of ego, and a crushing lack of that magical word, empathy. These are people who have like no empathy because there's nobody else existing in the world but them. So yeah, I tend to look at it. I mean, everything. Pretty much everything is, for me, is viewed through that lens, the CPTSD lens, of being an emotional flashback, of being a learned strategy. And then within that realm, I would play, as you know, because background's martial arts, so we push and pull. One of my favorite things to do was Tai Chi, combat Tai Chi, the sticky hands, the Chi Sao, and combat Tai Chi. And sometimes when you're working with somebody, you push and pull. You get the different energies, and you can actually, yes, the cluster B is seeking to evoke emotion from you, but you can also evoke emotion from them. You can also, they are impressionable. Should make a note of that. Would you guys be interested in me and Sam Vaknin doing a talk on how to manipulate an N-word? I already know the answer to that. In the comments, they'll be like, yes, we want that, do that. I better mention that, Sam. Right, I'm going to be late if I don't go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your attention. When you witness me, I feel seen, and it strengthens my sense of self, because that's what I need. Oh, God. Okay, thank you very much, guys, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you. Cheers.